Lars Mittank was supposed to be having the time of his life. It was June 2014, and the 28-year-old German man had traveled with a group of friends to Varna, Bulgaria, a popular Black Sea destination known for its golden beaches, cheap drinks, and vibrant nightlife. Lars wasn't the kind of guy people described as reckless. He was quiet, kind, and easygoing. Friends said he rarely got into arguments and certainly wasn't someone who went looking for trouble. But one night, everything changed. While out at a bar, Lars reportedly got into a heated exchange with a group of local men. Some reports say it was about a football rivalry. Others claim it was something even more trivial. Whatever it was, it escalated quickly. A fight broke out, leaving Lars with a ruptured eardrum. A serious enough injury that doctors told him he couldn't fly home with his friends as planned. Lars insisted his friends return to Germany without him. He said he'd be fine, he just needed a couple of days to recover. Alone now, he booked a cheap hotel near the airport. That's when things began to spiral into one of Europe's strangest and most chilling modern disappearances. Over the next few days, Lars began calling his mother, sounding panicked and afraid. He said people were following him. He told her to cancel his credit cards. He even texted her asking about the side effects of the antibiotic he'd been prescribed. Hotel staff later described him as visibly nervous, pacing, peering out windows, and checking over his shoulder like someone being hunted. Then came July 8th, the day he was scheduled to finally fly home. Surveillance footage from the airport shows Lars entering the terminal, calm at first. But minutes later, something seemed to trigger pure panic. He's seen speaking to an airport doctor, then suddenly backing away, eyes wide with fear. Without warning, he sprinted through the terminal, bolted out of the automatic doors, and ran full speed across the parking lot, leaving behind his luggage, passport, phone, everything. The last known footage of him shows him running into the trees near a construction site. After that, Lars Mittank was gone. What happened to him? Theories exploded online. Some believed Lars had a psychotic break, possibly triggered by a reaction to his antibiotic or by undiagnosed mental illness. Others believed something much darker was at play, that Lars really was being followed, and that whoever scared him enough to run barefoot into the Bulgarian wilderness didn't want him found. Alleged sightings popped up across Eastern Europe in the following years, but none were confirmed. His mother insists Lars wasn't mentally ill, that he wasn't the type to just vanish. She believes her son stumbled into something dangerous, something that left him terrified enough to abandon everything and flee as if his life depended on it. That chilling image, the young man sprinting out of the airport, eyes wide and terrified, disappearing into the woods, has been viewed millions of times online. Yet nearly a decade later, no one knows what Lars saw that day, and no one knows where he went. In the spring of 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished during a family fishing trip near Swayze Lake in Louisiana. The Dunbar family had taken their young son out to enjoy the day, but at some point, Bobby wandered away from the group. One moment he was playing near the water. The next, he was simply gone. A massive search was launched immediately. Hundreds of volunteers combed the woods, dragged the lake, and even set off dynamite underwater to loosen the lake bed in case his small body was trapped below. But there was no sign of Bobby. The Dunbars were devastated, and the town of Opelousas, Louisiana, was shaken to its core. For 8 months, posters, newspaper headlines, and rewards kept the case alive. But the boy never turned up. Then, in 1913, there was a breakthrough, or at least what everyone thought was one. A boy matching Bobby's description was spotted traveling with a man named William Walters, a traveling handyman in Mississippi. Walters claimed the boy was the son of Julia Anderson, a woman who had entrusted him with her child so she could work. But to the Dunbars, that didn't matter. They were convinced this was their Bobby. Walters was arrested on charges of kidnapping, and authorities arranged an emotional reunion. When Bobby's mother, Leslie Dunbar, first saw the boy, she hesitated. He didn't seem to recognize her, and she admitted she wasn't sure he was her son. But after spending a few days together, she told the police and press she was certain this was Bobby. Newspapers declared the case solved, praising the family's perseverance and the police's swift justice. Walters, however, maintained his innocence, insisting the boy was indeed Julia Anderson's child. Julia herself came forward, saying the boy was hers and had never been missing. But she was poor, without a lawyer, and had little support. In court, her claims were dismissed, and custody was granted to the Dunbars. Walters was convicted of kidnapping, and Julia Anderson was branded a liar and an unfit mother in the press. She returned home heartbroken, losing her son forever. The boy grew up as Bobby Dunbar, fully integrated into the Dunbar family's life. For decades, that was the official story, until the early 2000s. Bobby Dunbar's grandson, curious about family history, agreed to take part in a DNA study comparing his lineage to that of Julia Anderson's surviving relatives. The results shocked everyone. There was no genetic connection between the Dunbars and the boy they had raised. That boy was Bruce Anderson, Julia's son, which means the real Bobby Dunbar was never found. This revelation sent shockwaves through historical circles and true crime communities alike. It raised haunting questions. What really happened to Bobby on that fishing trip? Did he drown? Was he abducted by someone else entirely? Or did something more sinister take place? The saddest part is how human error and desperation for closure shaped the outcome. A grieving family, desperate to fill a void, accepted a child who wasn't theirs. The police, eager to solve a high-profile case, ignored a struggling mother's cries of truth. An innocent man was imprisoned, a child's identity was erased. And somewhere, the fate of the real Bobby Dunbar remains unknown to this day. In March of 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins vanished from his home in Los Angeles, California. His mother, Christine Collins, had given him a few coins to see a movie while she was at work. It was a simple, ordinary errand, but Walter never came home. Christine immediately contacted the police, launching one of the city's most high-profile child searches of the decade. Flyers went up, volunteers canvassed neighborhoods, and Christine tirelessly pleaded with the public for help. Weeks passed, then months, with no sign of her little boy. Then, 5 months later, the LAPD announced a miracle. Walter had been found alive. Authorities had located a boy in Illinois claiming to be Walter Collins. In August 1928, he was brought back to Los Angeles for a dramatic reunion staged in front of reporters. The cameras flashed, police smiled proudly, and Christine was expected to rejoice. But when she saw the boy, she froze. "This isn't my son," she said firmly. The police were stunned. They argued she was mistaken, that Walter had changed from trauma. They urged her to take the boy home on a trial basis, hoping she would change her mind. Christine reluctantly agreed, likely overwhelmed by public pressure. For 3 weeks, she tried to convince herself this was Walter, but deep down, she knew the truth. She returned to the LAPD with her final answer. "This boy is not my son." Rather than admit their mistake, the police had Christine committed to a psychiatric ward, labeling her delusional and unfit. Meanwhile, the boy finally confessed. He wasn't Walter Collins at all. His name was Arthur Hutchins, a runaway who had impersonated Walter to get a free trip to California and meet his favorite actors. The LAPD's blunder was humiliating, but the real horror was just beginning. Around the same time, a man named Gordon Northcott was arrested for horrific crimes committed at his isolated chicken farm in Wineville, California. Northcott had lured young boys to his property, imprisoned them, and murdered them. When authorities raided the farm, they uncovered evidence of multiple killings. Among the potential victims, Walter Collins. But Northcott never gave a straight answer. He played games with investigators and even taunted Christine, sometimes claiming Walter was dead, other times saying he hadn't touched him. Northcott was eventually convicted of other murders and executed, but Walter's fate remained a mystery. Christine Collins never stopped searching for her son. She spent the rest of her life pursuing leads, hoping one day to know the truth. She never got it. The city never formally apologized for committing her to an asylum simply because she wouldn't go along with their lie. The case was so shocking that it inspired the film Changeling starring Angelina Jolie, but even Hollywood couldn't capture the full tragedy. A grieving mother gaslit by those meant to protect her, a boy exploited for headlines, and a system that valued public image over truth. Almost a century later, Walter Collins remains missing. And the question lingers, what really happened to that boy on that March afternoon? In August 2008, 24-year-old Kayla Reed vanished from a small town in British Columbia, Canada. Kayla had recently moved back in with her parents after a difficult breakup and was trying to rebuild her life. She had no criminal history, no substance abuse issues, and no reason anyone could think of to simply disappear. On the night she vanished, Kayla told her mother she was going to meet a friend for coffee. She left the house around 7:30 p.m., wearing jeans, a light hoodie, and carrying her phone, but no purse. That was the last time her family saw her. When she failed to show up for her meeting, her friend assumed she had changed plans. But when she didn't return home that night and didn't answer her phone, her parents called the police. The search started immediately. For days, volunteers combed the surrounding woods, rivers, and hiking trails. Dogs were brought in, drones scanned the forests, and police interviewed everyone who had spoken to Kayla in the past 48 hours. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence she had left town, and no leads on what might have happened. Her phone had powered off less than an hour after she left home. There were no withdrawals from her bank account, no unusual internet activity, no sightings. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth. For 11 long months, her family lived with uncertainty. Was she kidnapped? Dead? Or did she choose to walk away from her life? Then, everything changed. In the early hours of July 5th, 2009, Kayla walked into a hospital 200 miles from her hometown. She was barefoot, thin, dehydrated, and sunburned, wearing clothes that weren't hers. She wrote her name on a piece of paper and collapsed into a chair. When nurses tried to question her, she wouldn't speak. Police confirmed her identity via fingerprints. Her parents rushed to the hospital expecting an emotional reunion. Instead, Kayla stared at them blankly, smiled faintly, but did not hug them. When doctors and detectives tried to find out what had happened, she offered almost nothing. The only words she spoke about her disappearance were chilling. "I was in the dark. I was safe, but it wasn't me." She had no signs of abuse, no head injuries, and no drugs in her system. Toxicology was clean. Psychiatrists couldn't find evidence of psychosis or dissociation. After a week of observation, she was quietly discharged into her family's care. Kayla deleted all of her social media accounts, refused interviews, and within a year, moved away under a new identity. The mystery deepened after one nurse claimed that, on the night before Kayla was released, she whispered to her, "Don't go into the woods alone. They find you there." When asked who "they" were, Kayla only shook her head and smiled. The case was officially closed. Kayla had returned, and she wasn't a victim of any proven crime. But those involved, from nurses to police officers, admitted they were left deeply unsettled. Kayla Reed came back from somewhere, changed in ways no one could explain. Where had she been for nearly a year? Who had she been with? And what exactly did she mean by "they find you there"? To this day, no one knows. On a quiet afternoon in October 2017, 15-year-old high school sophomore Connor Hastings walked home from school in Santa Rosa, California, just as he had done hundreds of times before. It was a safe, familiar route, a mix of suburban homes, tree-lined streets, and a small wooded trail near a park. But on that day, Connor never made it home. When his mother noticed he was late, she tried calling his cell phone, but there was no answer. By 7:00 p.m., panic set in, and police were contacted. Within hours, search teams were scouring the neighborhood. The next day, investigators found his backpack dumped behind a dumpster just blocks from his usual route. His phone was missing. There were no eyewitnesses, no security footage, and no clear signs of a struggle. Connor's friends revealed something odd. In the days before he vanished, he had been acting paranoid, asking how to tell if someone was following him and mentioning a man in a red jacket he believed was watching him. Some dismissed it as teenage anxiety, but others wondered if it was a warning sign of something far darker. For months, Connor's disappearance dominated local headlines. Police combed the wooded trails where his scent abruptly ended, but there were no footprints, tire marks, or dropped belongings beyond the backpack. It was as if he'd been plucked off the street and erased. Then, 5 months later, Connor reappeared. In March 2018, a 911 call came from a payphone in a small town 60 miles away. The caller reported a teenage boy sitting silently on a library bench. When police arrived, they found Connor, alive, but deeply shaken. His hair was long, his clothes were filthy, and in his hands he clutched a spiral notebook. Inside? Nothing. Every page was blank, except the last. At the bottom of the final page, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 chilling words. I was not alone. At first, Connor wouldn't speak. He stared ahead, mute, for over 24 hours. When his parents arrived, he broke down sobbing, clinging to his mother like a child half his age. When he finally spoke, his answers were cryptic. He said he had been taken by a group, but couldn't describe faces or locations. He claimed they kept him in a place without clocks, and that it was always cold. When asked how he escaped, Connor said, "They just let me go. I think I passed their test." He never explained what that test was, or who they were. Police interviewed him repeatedly, but could find no leads, no suspects, and no known criminal networks in the area matching his story. The FBI briefly reviewed the case but released no findings. Connor changed schools, deleted his online presence, and now lives under a different name. He has never spoken publicly about his ordeal again. To this day, the notebook remains one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Blank pages, save for one quiet message written like a warning. I was not alone. Connor Hastings' case is officially resolved because he came home alive. But for those who worked the case, it feels anything but resolved. If there was a group, if there were others, like Connor claimed, then there's one question that still keeps people awake at night. Why did they let him go? On the night of February 9, 2004, 21-year-old nursing student Maura Murray disappeared after a seemingly minor car accident on a remote stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Nearly 2 decades later, her fate remains one of America's most chilling and heavily debated mysteries. Earlier that day, Maura abruptly left her dorm at UMass Amherst. She emailed her professors explaining there had been a death in the family, and she'd be gone for a few days. But no one in her family had died. She withdrew nearly all the money from her bank account, packed clothes, toiletries, and alcohol, and then quietly drove north toward the White Mountains. Around 7:27 p.m., a local woman called 911 to report a car accident near her house. Maura's black Saturn had slid into a snowbank. A neighbor, a school bus driver, spoke with Maura briefly. She seemed cold and shaken, but insisted she didn't need help. He left and called the police anyway. When officers arrived just minutes later, Maura was gone. Her car doors were locked, airbags deployed, and a box of wine had spilled across the interior. Her cell phone, wallet, and backpack were missing, but there were no footprints leading away from the road, just her scent trail, which dogs tracked for about 100 yards before it abruptly ended. In the following days, police and volunteers scoured the woods, knocking on doors, searching rivers, and hiking trails. There was no sign of her. It was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. Theories began to multiply. Some believed Maura staged her disappearance. Tired of school, relationships, and financial stress, she might have planned a fresh start. Others argued she had been abducted by someone who either followed her or just happened to pass by at the worst possible moment. There were even suggestions she might have accepted a ride from someone she knew. Then came darker speculation, a serial predator operating in the area, or even a police cover-up. But no hard evidence ever emerged to support any of these claims. Maura's life leading up to that night also drew scrutiny. She had recently been in minor trouble at school, and her boyfriend relationship was strained. But nothing pointed to her wanting to permanently disappear. Her family insisted she wasn't suicidal and had been planning for the future. Years later, podcasts, documentaries, and internet forums turned her case into one of the most heavily dissected disappearances in the country. Still, nothing definitive has been found, not even a piece of clothing. If Maura was abducted, whoever took her left no trace, suggesting planning and precision. If she ran away, she succeeded beyond belief, leaving behind an entire life, never touching her bank accounts, phone, or social security number again. The stretch of Route 112 where she disappeared is still visited by amateur sleuths every year, hoping for answers. Some leave flowers by the tree where her car struck the snowbank. Others search the woods for clues, convinced that somewhere out there, Maura is waiting to be found. But 2 decades later, the only certainty is that something happened on that cold February night. Something that took Maura Murray away and left nothing but questions in its place. Nome, Alaska, is one of the most remote places in the United States. Surrounded by tundra and accessible primarily by air, it's the kind of town where unusual events tend to become local legends. And in November 2004, one such event began when 37-year-old electrician Rick Hills simply vanished. Rick wasn't a drifter or a troubled soul. He had a steady job, a small cabin on the outskirts of town, and a reputation for being quiet and hardworking. He lived alone, like many in Nome, preferring solitude and the rugged lifestyle that remote Alaska offers. On the morning of November 13th, Rick didn't show up for work. His boss tried calling but got no answer. That evening, a co-worker drove out to his cabin. Rick's truck was parked outside, but the lights were off and the front door was slightly ajar. When the co-worker stepped inside, he found an eerie scene. Rick's coffee pot was still half full and warm. His phone was on the table, and his jacket and boots were neatly placed by the door, exactly where he would have left them if he'd just stepped out for a moment. But there were no footprints in the light snowfall outside, no sign of a struggle, and no indication he had packed to leave. Local police searched the area extensively, bringing in dogs, drones, and helicopters. The surrounding tundra is harsh, but even in those conditions, someone leaving on foot would have left some sign. Yet there was nothing. Then, 2 days later, a hiker 30 miles north of Nome made a disturbing discovery. He found a single sock frozen into the mud of a remote game trail. Near it, partially buried under snow, was a crumpled Polaroid photograph. The photo showed Rick's cabin, but from the woods, at an angle suggesting it was taken secretly. In the reflection of the window was a face. According to one investigator, the face didn't look quite human. Its eyes too wide, its mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-whisper. The photo was turned over to the police, but it was never released to the public. Years later, a retired officer anonymously claimed it was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. Rick's disappearance wasn't unique. Over 20 people had gone missing in Nome and the surrounding region in the decade before his case, sparking FBI involvement. Officially, those disappearances were attributed to alcohol, harsh weather, and accidents. But Rick's case felt different. Locals began whispering about the Watcher, a shadowy figure or force that, according to native legends, lived between the trees and came out at night. The Polaroid only fueled those fears, giving a face, albeit a distorted one, to those whispered stories. Years passed with no trace of Rick Hills. His bank accounts remained untouched, his phone never pinged another tower, and no one ever used his identity. His family eventually held a memorial, but some in Nome still insist Rick didn't just walk off into the snow. They believe he saw something that night, something watching him. And whatever it was, it took him, just like it had taken so many others before.